When I was very young, somewhere around second or third grade, something happened that I still can't forget. My memory of that time is hazy, but this night stands out. It was a regular school day and heavy rain had been pouring since morning. After picking me up from class, my parents headed to a fancy evening function. Maybe a charity dinner or some sort of fundraiser. I honestly can't recall. They promised they'd return that night, but the weather turned violent. Driving long distances became too risky, so they reluctantly chose to stay over at a friend's house closer to the event. They called the home phone more than once, apologizing for leaving me alone. I kept telling them I was fine and not even hungry. My mom listed a few safety steps before bed. Lock every door and window, close all the blinds, leave a light on. Pretty normal instructions. At that age, I didn't grasp how serious it was to leave a kid my age unsupervised. To me, it just meant candy with no bedtime. There wasn't a TV in my room, so I set up camp on the living room couch and kept the television running. I figured I'd handle my mom's checklist right before crashing for the night, since I planned to stay up late. Of course, the sugar rush wore off and I dozed off. I'm not sure how long I slept, but it was late enough for the TV to slip into sleep mode. Probably at least 3 hours. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was how cold the house felt. Nights are cooler, sure, but this was a sharp drop. I considered just curling back under the blanket, then remembered my mom's instructions. Even as a little kid, I knew she'd find out if I skipped them, and I didn't want to ruin her trust. So I dragged myself off the couch and made the rounds. Front door, back door, every window, the hallway light. Everything was locked tight, which confused me because the chill didn't make sense. I even pressed my hand to a few windows to check for drafts, but nothing. I convinced myself maybe the storm knocked out the heater and tried not to think about it. Upstairs in my room, the storm's power finally hit me. My bedroom window faced outside and rain hammered the glass like it wanted in. Lightning ripped across the sky every minute, followed by thunder that shook the walls. I wasn't scared of storms, though I did worry a tree might crash through the roof. That probably explains why sleep wouldn't come, no matter how exhausted I'd felt earlier. As I lay there, a different sound began to bother me. Soft, irregular creaks, like old wood bending. The carpeted floor ruled out my room as the source. I thought maybe a tree outside was groaning in the wind, but the sound didn't match anything I knew from thunderstorms. It kept nagging at me until I finally sat up, straining to locate it. A flash of lightning lit the room for a split second. Everything looked normal, yet my eyes locked on the only wooden object nearby, the closet door. The next flash confirmed it. It was slightly open. I was absolutely certain I'd shut it. Something had moved it. My stomach dropped. I didn't scream. I didn't even think. I slipped quietly out of bed and tiptoed to the doorway, that short walk feeling endless. Then I crept down the stairs and crawled beneath the dining room table, where I finally let silent tears run down my face. Someone was in my room and my parents were miles away. I don't know how long I hid there before hearing footsteps descending the staircase. Heavy, uneven steps that sounded almost playful, like someone bouncing down. They drew closer, heading straight for the dining room. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. From my hiding spot, I saw them. 2 bare, filthy feet and mud-stained legs, streaked yellow, covered with scratches as if the person had fought through thorny bushes. I couldn't tell if they belonged to a man or a woman. The stranger dropped something, a metal wrench, that clattered across the floor. I fought every instinct to scream. If they bent down to grab it, they'd spot me. They stood motionless for a tense eternity, then finally shuffled away. I listened to their erratic steps echo through the first floor until, at last, the front door opened and shut. Silence. I stayed frozen long after they left, too shaken to move. Eventually, I picked up the wrench, double-checked the lock on the front door, and crept back upstairs to my bed. Somehow, I fell asleep. When my parents returned the next day, I said nothing. I was terrified they'd be angry that I hadn't locked everything sooner. Years passed before I confessed the story, and it took effort to convince them it really happened. Looking back, keeping quiet that night was the worst choice. I'll never know who that person was or how they entered. The only lesson I carried forward is one I'll never forget. Always lock your doors. When I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9, I went through a stretch of years haunted by the same dream over and over. I can't pinpoint when it began, only that it returned every couple of months and burned itself into my memory. The dream never started in first person. Instead, it felt like I was floating near the ceiling of my own bedroom, watching myself sleep the way a security camera might. That out-of-body view was terrifying in itself. I'd try to move toward my body, but I was locked in place, able only to swivel my head as if I were weightless but trapped. Once I calmed enough to observe the room, small details began to twist. My digital clock always ticked backward, the numbers counting in reverse. After noticing that, other strange features appeared. Childish crayon drawings taped to the walls, rows of smiling stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a blue roof. I never drew pictures like that, and I had no memory of making them. A lost toy train that had disappeared years earlier would also sit in a new spot on the carpet each time. Then came the part I dreaded most. An invisible urge pulled my eyes toward the window. Almost on cue, a man would appear just inches from the glass. He had short gray hair and a deep cut or scar running along his left temple. His face is mostly a blur now, but I can still recall the way he stared. Calm at first, then clawing at the window frame as if trying to pry it open. That was always when I jolted awake. Sometimes I'd spring straight to the window. Other times I froze in paralyzed terror, but I always checked. There was never a mark or footprint outside. After the 4th episode, I finally told my parents. My mom explained that recurring dreams weren't unusual, while my dad reminded me they were only a room away. Their reassurances didn't help. Seeing the exact same sequence 4 separate times felt like more than coincidence. And then, without warning, the dream stopped. Nearly 6 months passed before it returned. Everything inside the dream matched the earlier ones. The clock counting backward, the drawings, the toy train. But something felt horribly different. I couldn't place it until I noticed the bedroom window. This time it wasn't shut. The second I realized that, I woke up, completely unable to move. My mind screamed at me to check the lock, but my body was frozen in full-on sleep paralysis. Cold air brushed my face as if the window truly stood open. Those 5 minutes of immobility remained the most frightening of my life. When sensation finally returned, I stumbled to the window and found it securely latched. For months afterward, I obsessed over the dream, rehearsing it every night so I'd be less startled if it happened again. Oddly enough, that strategy worked. When the nightmare resurfaced, I stayed calmer. I even stopped rushing to the window once I woke. Eventually, I described the man in greater detail to my parents. The moment I mentioned the scar, my dad abruptly interrupted to ask if I was certain about it. When I said yes, he exchanged a quiet, worried glance with my mom. Later that evening, they finally explained. When I was a toddler, too young to remember, a family friend named Brian often babysat me. They had once called him Uncle Brian, though he wasn't related. Something serious happened between him and my dad, and the friendship ended abruptly. My father refused to share the reason, only that Brian was never allowed near our family again. One more detail chilled me. Brian carried a noticeable scar across his forehead from an old car accident. My dad offered a theory that the dreams were my subconscious unearthing early memories of Brian, details I couldn't consciously recall. Maybe that explained the scar, but even he couldn't account for what happened next. Months later, after a long, quiet stretch, I woke from the same dream and, out of habit, glanced toward the window. This time I actually saw something move outside. A flicker of motion, quick but undeniable. I screamed for my parents. My dad sprinted into the yard while my mom held me tight. When he returned, he whispered to her before calling the police. I never heard sirens that night, and I'm almost certain no report was filed. But my dad later admitted he had found faint footprints beneath my window. I never had the nightmare again after that night. My parents avoid the topic to this day, and I've stopped pressing for answers. I still wonder which possibility is worse, that Brian somehow tracked us down after all those years, or that some total stranger happened to appear exactly as my dreams predicted.
I had always thought my hometown was safe. The kind of place where nothing truly unexpected happened, where the streets were quiet and everyone knew each other. That illusion ended one late summer night when I decided to take a walk alone, just to clear my mind after a long day at work. The sun had set, and the air was warm but slightly humid, carrying that familiar smell of asphalt and flowers from the nearby park. I walked past the usual streets, noticing the closed shops and dimly lit windows, when I saw something strange near the old community center. A man was sitting on the bench wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled over his face. At first, I thought he was just someone waiting for a ride or a friend, but something about the way he sat perfectly still, hands folded on his knees, made me uneasy. I debated whether to keep walking or cross to the other side of the street, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked closer, trying not to make it obvious, and as I did, he lifted his head slightly. I could see his eyes briefly, sharp and focused, before he looked back down. I decided to greet him politely. "Hi, are you waiting for someone?" No response. His silence was unsettling, but I shrugged it off and continued past him. A few steps later, I felt that familiar prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I glanced back. He was no longer on the bench. I froze. The street was empty, but I could swear I saw a shadow moving behind the lampposts. I quickened my pace, telling myself it was probably my imagination. I turned another corner, hoping to find a more populated street, and heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me. Not fast, not chasing, just following. My heart rate quickened. I turned slightly, and for a split second, our eyes met. He was wearing the same dark hoodie, but his face was now fully visible, pale and expressionless, almost ghostly. I broke into a run. The footsteps accelerated too, echoing against the empty buildings. I darted into a narrow alley, thinking I could lose him, but it was a dead end. He appeared at the entrance, blocking the way out. I backed up slowly, trying to keep him in sight. "Who are you?" "What do you want?" I yelled, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and held out a small object that glinted in the faint streetlight. I couldn't see what it was, but instinct told me it wasn't harmless. Desperation took over. I noticed a dumpster behind me and scrambled onto it, then leapt over a low wall into someone's yard. The sound of the object hitting the concrete behind me startled me. He was still there, at the alley entrance, watching. I ran across the yard, hopped over a fence, and finally reached a street with cars parked along the side. I pounded on the first door I saw, hoping for help. A man opened, startled, and I gasped out my story, pointing behind me. He looked, and the street was empty. "I think you lost him," he said. I thanked him, but didn't wait to explain further. I ran all the way home, locked the doors, and sat in my living room shaking. I couldn't make sense of what had happened. No one had seen him follow me, and yet I knew I wasn't imagining it. The next morning, I went back to the community center and the alley. Everything looked normal, deserted, like nothing had occurred. No footprints, no sign of anyone being there. Weeks later, I learned from neighbors that a man had been spotted wandering the streets at night for months, never speaking to anyone, just watching. Some claimed he was harmless. Others whispered darker things. I never saw him again, but every time I walked alone at night, I felt the same prickle of fear, the certainty that he was somewhere nearby, silently watching, waiting. That night changed how I viewed my hometown forever. It wasn't the quiet, safe place I thought it was. It was a place where shadows could hide, where someone could appear and disappear without a trace, and where the line between normal and terrifying was thinner than I had ever imagined. I still walk the streets occasionally, but I always keep my eyes open, my senses alert, and my phone in my hand. Because some nights I swear I can feel him watching, just beyond the corner of my eye, reminding me that safety is never guaranteed, and that fear can be closer than we think.
I was 22 when this happened, fresh out of college and lucky enough to be back in my hometown saving money while living with my parents. My routine was quiet and predictable. Work during the week, hiking, or reading on weekends. I wasn't a party girl, never liked drinking to excess, and never let guys dictate my plans. So when my closest college friend Lindsay invited me and two other friends, Thea and Sabrina, to spend a long weekend at her family's beach house, I hesitated at first. Lindsay described the property like something from a movie, hidden from tourists, steps from a stretch of private sand, and designed in sleek, modern architecture. Both of her parents were neurosurgeons, and when we finally pulled up late that Friday afternoon, the house looked more like a luxury resort than a vacation home. Glass walls reflected the fading sunlight, and the entire place seemed to glow against the sound of distant surf. Although the house had more than enough bedrooms for each of us, we decided to stay together in one of the children's rooms that held two sets of bunk beds and a small attached bathroom. It felt cozy and playful, like the sleepovers we'd had back in high school. That first night, we wanted to keep things low-key. After dinner, we carried cans of hard seltzer down to the private beach. The air was cool and smelled of salt, and the stars looked close enough to touch. We sat in the sand, music playing softly from a portable speaker, trading stories and laughing. Somewhere down the shoreline, a faint flicker of light appeared. At first, just a spark, then a rhythmic, swinging glow. The four of us quieted, watching as the light moved closer. Soon we could make out silhouettes, 3 or maybe 4 people walking at an easy pace. Their laughter carried over the crash of waves, which eased our tension. A male voice called out a friendly, "Hey there!" and Thea shouted a cheerful reply. As they approached, the shapes resolved into 3 young men, maybe a year or 2 older than us. Sun-tanned, casually dressed, they had the effortless beach boy look that always made Thea's eyes light up. They plopped down in the sand with their beers and struck up easy conversation. They weren't pushy or obviously flirting, just relaxed and funny enough to keep us talking. An hour slipped by in a haze of music and alcohol. Eventually, one of the guys suggested we head back to the house they were renting to keep the night going. I was starting to feel drowsy from the drinks and the ocean air and planned to call it a night, but my 3 friends clearly wanted to continue. Not wanting to ruin their fun, I told them I'd walk back to Lindsay's and see them in the morning. They promised to text updates and disappeared down the beach with the guys, while I trudged alone toward the glowing glass walls of Lindsay's house. Back inside, I showered, changed into pajamas, and fell asleep to the muffled roar of the tide. Sometime after 3 a.m., my phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. It was a FaceTime call from Lindsay. Still half asleep, I answered, and her frantic voice jolted me upright. "They took them!" she screamed. "Thea and Sabrina! Someone grabbed them! Get my car now and meet me outside. I already called the police." Adrenaline shot through me like electricity. My hands shook as I yanked on clothes and bolted down the stairs. Following Lindsay's shouted instructions over the phone, I unlocked the driveway gate, found her car keys, and jumped into the driver's seat. She directed me to head left down the coastal road and look for a dark SUV about 10 houses away. The street was deserted. I floored the accelerator, praying not to miss a turn. After what felt like forever, I spotted a slow-moving vehicle matching her description. Heart hammering, I hung up on Lindsay and immediately called 911, giving the dispatcher the license plate and location. The operator warned me to keep my distance so the suspects wouldn't realize they were being followed. Minutes crawled by before the flashing lights of patrol cars appeared in the distance. The SUV didn't speed up or swerve. It must have assumed the stop was routine. I pulled over as instructed and watched the chaos unfold. Officers surrounded the vehicle with weapons drawn, yanking the three men out one by one. Another officer opened the rear hatch, revealing Thea and Sabrina bound with rope, bruised and terrified but alive. Later, when the shock settled enough for words, Lindsay explained the nightmare she had witnessed. After I left the beach, the men suggested splitting up for the night. Lindsay insisted on returning home, which angered the third guy. They argued until he ordered her out of the house. She left but realized halfway back that she had forgotten her purse. When she returned, she saw the men forcing Thea and Sabrina into the SUV. She immediately called the police and me before following them on foot until I arrived with the car. The aftermath was equally surreal. Investigators discovered the house the men had used wasn't theirs at all. The owners were vacationing overseas. The suspects faced a stack of charges: breaking and entering, unlawful restraint, attempted kidnapping, and more. Thea's parents, both attorneys, ensured the case stayed out of the public eye while pushing for the harshest possible sentences. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to sleep. Beaches that once felt calming now triggered waves of panic. I avoided late-night outings and drifted from my friends, retreating into a shell of routine and caution. Although I eventually recovered some sense of normalcy, I can't stop replaying the what-ifs. If Lindsay hadn't noticed my forgotten purse, if I hadn't answered the phone immediately, if the police had been even a few minutes slower, Thea and Sabrina might have disappeared without a trace. That single thought still sends a chill through me whenever I hear the sound of waves at night. This happened just last summer over 4th of July weekend. My lifelong friend Jimmy runs a small but fast-growing events company that books big-name DJs and hosts electronic dance parties at high-profile clubs along the East Coast. Because we've known each other for more than 20 years, he often lets me and a few mutual friends tag along for free. His shows are always packed, the kind of nights where the bass makes your chest vibrate and strangers feel like teammates on the dance floor. Jimmy invited me and our buddy Ryan to come down early to the Jersey Shore for the biggest event his team had ever organized. We drove to the venue that afternoon, hours before the doors opened. Jimmy had to coordinate with staff and performers, which left Ryan and me to wander and, of course, take advantage of the open bar. The venue provided unlimited drinks for the crew, and we were determined to celebrate the holiday weekend in style. By the time the first DJ began his set, we were more than tipsy. 2 hours later, we were flat out drunk. It wasn't the sloppy, stumbling kind of drunk, more the buzzing, loose-limbed kind where every decision feels like a good idea. The night blurred into a montage of flashing lights, pounding beats, and strangers dancing shoulder to shoulder. When the final set wound down after midnight, the crowd thinned, and the question became the same one every party eventually asks: where do we go next? Jimmy had rented a nearby Airbnb with extra beds for us, so we already had a safe place to crash. But as Ryan and I leaned against the bar finishing another round, 2 women approached. They introduced themselves, at least I think their names were Gianna and Marcella, and struck up an easy conversation. They were tall, stylish, and confident, dressed like they belonged to the upper crust of beach town nightlife. After a few minutes, Marcella suggested we leave with them for a more private after-party. Before we could answer, Gianna handed each of us a fresh drink, laughing that we needed to catch up before heading out. It seemed a little odd for strangers to buy us drinks, but the atmosphere of the night made second-guessing feel unnecessary. We downed the cocktails and followed them toward the exit. Outside, the cool ocean air cut through the heavy heat of the club. The women led us down a quiet stretch of sand toward a massive beach house that looked like it belonged to a professional athlete or movie star. Floor-to-ceiling windows glowed softly in the moonlight, and the distant surf made everything feel dreamlike. Marcella claimed it was her place. Neither Ryan nor I questioned it. The house was so impressive it almost hypnotized us. Inside, the decor was sleek and expensive. Minimalist furniture, sculptures on pedestals, walls of pale stone. We kicked off our shoes and followed the women into a wide living room. Ryan disappeared with Marcella almost immediately, leaving me alone with Gianna. She leaned closer, smiling, and that's when my memory fractures. I remember her face approaching mine for a kiss, and then nothing. No gradual fading, no warning dizziness, just a sudden blank wall where time should be. What came next is a collection of fragments. I woke to blinding daylight overhead, lying in a patch of prickly bushes beside a deserted two-lane road. My head throbbed like a drum. My phone, wallet, and keys were gone. Even the clothes on my body weren't mine. Cheap shorts and a t-shirt that smelled faintly of chlorine. The only familiar items were my sneakers, soaking wet and missing their laces. For several minutes, I simply stared at the sky, trying to assemble a narrative from nothing. Had I been in a fight? Hit by a car? Drugged? Every theory felt both possible and impossible. There were no landmarks around me except a lone 7-Eleven across the street, so I staggered inside and asked the clerk to borrow a phone. He eyed me suspiciously but slid his cell across the counter. The only number I still knew by heart was my sister's. When she answered, I spilled a jumbled explanation. She immediately gave me Ryan's number and urged me to call him. I tried several times, no response. Panic surged. What if he'd been abandoned somewhere too? I was on the verge of dialing the police when the convenience store door opened and, unbelievably, Ryan walked in. We stared at each other for a long second before breaking into shaky laughter, the kind born of pure relief. His story mirrored mine almost exactly. He'd woken up miles away, also in unfamiliar clothes, missing all personal belongings. Neither of us remembered leaving the house or even saying goodbye to the women. We finally called the police. Officers arrived quickly and listened to our account with polite skepticism. They asked if we were sure we hadn't simply drunk too much and wandered off. We insisted the situation was more sinister. Our simultaneous blackouts, the stolen items, the inexplicable distance from the venue. The officers exchanged doubtful looks but agreed to help us track our phones using my sister's Find My iPhone link. To everyone's surprise, both devices pinged from the same location, a parking lot a short drive away. The police escorted us there, and sure enough, our phones lay side by side on the asphalt, untouched and strangely clean. Finding them only deepened the mystery. If we'd merely passed out drunk, how did our phones travel together to a random lot? Why were our shoes wet and unlaced? And whose clothes were we wearing? The officers hinted that without evidence of assault or robbery beyond the missing wallets, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested we take it as a lesson about alcohol. Ryan and I exchanged frustrated glances but said nothing more. Back at Jimmy's Airbnb, exhaustion replaced adrenaline. We tried piecing together the night, who Gianna and Marcella really were, how they could have drugged us, what they might have intended, but every theory ended in a dead end. Surveillance footage from the club later showed us leaving with the women, but no camera ever caught our return. Weeks have passed, and the memory gap remains a black void. We both tested negative for common date rape drugs, which makes the situation even harder to explain. Sometimes I wonder if the women were working with a larger group, or if their goal was something we'll never understand. The most disturbing thought is also the simplest. While I have no memory of those missing hours, my phone records prove I was awake, sending texts I cannot recall, long after my mind went dark. To this day, I can't stand the smell of club fog machines or the taste of sweet cocktails. They're reminders of a night that, for all I know, could have ended far worse. And though the police called it just another drunk story, I know with absolute certainty that someone, somewhere, knows exactly what happened, and that Ryan and I were never supposed to wake up and tell anyone.